areas concerning marriage is communication. And if we're not careful in our communication, we can end up talking at each other instead of with each other. We want to look at some points about communication. Talking to each other and not at each other. We're going to use 5 keys to good communication. Marriage is an intimate relationship between a husband and a wife. We've heard several times today from Genesis 2 that God put Adam to sleep and took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And with that rib he made a woman and brought her unto Adam. And Adam said, "This is it, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." And thus a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. And so we find here that when it comes to marriage, it's an intimate relationship. And that relationship is very, very important. Marriage is God's cure for loneliness and also for isolation. God said once he made the man, "It is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a help meet suitable for him." All the animals were paired off. Adam was alone. And so marriage is the cure for loneliness. The family is the foundation of society, and its permanence is critical. It's not a light matter that we focus on the family and that we strive to encourage the family because it strengthens the community. Also, of course, the fact that it's permanent, Jesus said, "For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. Wherefore there are no more twain but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder." And thus children are the natural consequence, or sequence, I should say, of marriage. And it requires much communication. Once two people marry and the family is enlarged with children, then it's imperative that communication be in the home. Relationships can be challenging, and communication can be difficult because sometimes the man has one perspective, the woman has another perspective, in their communication that comes from two different places. And we expect the other person to think like we think. Right. And men are from Mars and women from Venus or some of that nature, and so we come from different places. So our communications come from a different understanding, a different motivation. Communication is expressing one's thoughts, feelings, and desires to another. And thus, when we communicate, each person has the responsibility and the obligation to communicate what his thoughts are. We can't read minds. And when we start reading minds, we make assumptions and we make exaggerations. But communication is when both people can identify and verbalize what their thoughts are, what their feelings are, and what their desires are to the other person. The other person says, "I can understand that. This is what you're saying." And then they can begin to express what their thoughts, feelings, and desires are. Thus, there are 5 keys to good communication. Number 1, the tone of voice matters. When we are talking, it's imperative that we monitor our tone of voice. We're not to communicate in anger. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7, in verse 9, when it comes to anger, it shows a negative spirit. And so we need to avoid anger in our relationships and in our communication. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 9, be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. Okay? And so when we get angry, that's a negative spirit, and it hinders and hurts our communication. So it's imperative to keep the thermostat on and make sure that the temperature doesn't get too heated. Also, our tone of voice is not to be harsh. In Proverbs 15 and verse number 1, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So sometimes it's how we say something, the tone of it. It should not be harsh, that soft answer. And so we have to monitor the tone. Also in verse 18, a wrathful man stirreth up strife, but he that is slow to anger appeaseth strife. So we can avoid confrontations, conflict, arguing and bickering by monitoring the tone in which we speak. Also, no intimidating or threatening. When it comes to our communication, we are married, thus we're grown people. Grown people can't make other grown folk do anything. So intimidating and blowing a lot of hot air and being threatening is not how to communicate. In Proverbs 29:22, an angry man stirreth up strife, and a furious man aboundeth in transgressions. Usually when we get angry, we do something or say something we shouldn't say, and we end up regretting it. Because for some reason, when we get angry, we're not thinking right. And we respond more harshly than we otherwise would because we're angry. And I want to punish somebody now that I'm angry. So I'm going to let you know how mad I am and how disappointed I am. And so intimidating and threatening, whereby someone become afraid that, this person is going to do something, they're going to hurt me in some kind of way. Then when we're talking to adults, a person has the right to say no, even a spouse. And there should not be threats and intimidations. Now, saying no has consequences. It's a withdrawal from your love account, and it hurts the marriage. But that person has the right to do that without saying, I'm going to make you do it. And so intimidating and threatening in our tone of voice is a no-no. Also hollering. Sometimes we want to blow the roof off the house, and that's just not good. In Colossians 3:21, you fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged. And so hollering and screaming and shouting is not the appropriate way to even handle disappointments. In James 1 and verse 19, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And so these principles apply in marriage, whether it's with the children or with our spouses. Also, we need to have a tone of voice that shows compassion. When you think about compassion, it's the ability to feel another person's hurt. It feels like I'm going through that. You've heard mothers say that when a child had a baby, it felt like she had the labor pain or something happened, they felt like something happened. That's compassion. And so the Good Samaritan was able to feel the man's hurt. He had compassion on him. And so when we speak, we need to speak with compassion. Also with tenderness. Words matter. This idea, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt. Words can hurt.
Yes, amen.
And so we need to be very careful. We need to speak with a tone of tenderness. Also with humility. And simply recognizing that I need to lower myself. I need to bring the temperature down and make sure that my words are not in any way creating strife. With respect. Respect simply means that you have a right to privacy. You have a right to have a different opinion. You have a right to express how you feel, and I'm going to respect it. I may not agree, but you have a right to have your opinion. And therefore, respect means I respect it, even if my opinion happens to be different. Because you're an adult, you can have a different opinion along that line. Now, we strive to come to a negotiated middle so no one is disrespected or run over. So if we have two different opinions about something, how can we get on the same page that we go together? That's what the negotiating that Brother Rand was talking about, that we're able to negotiate and then go together. And then if that way fails, we try the second way. All right? Number two, the words spoken matter. It's not just the tone, also the words that we select matter. Sometimes people say, well, you know, I told the truth.
That's right.
But the truth may have been told in such a way
That's right.
that it hurts the situation.
That's right, sir.
And so no profanity. Sometimes people say, well, I just got upset. Well, you can get upset. But the Bible said be angry and what? Sin not. When you curse, when you use profanity, then you are violating Scripture. In Colossians 4 and verse 6, let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer every man. There's a certain way we ought to answer, and it ought not be with profanity.
Amen.
Cursing should not be heard in our homes.
Amen.
And so when we communicate, then the cursing and other type of vile words ought not be used. No belittling. Well, you look like in your size and your weaknesses. Sometimes we can talk about something and use such words to hurt, to pierce, to penetrate, to crush, with the intent of saying, I'll win if I got to run over you.
That's right.
And so belittling ought not be in our conversation
Amen.
with each other. If we disagree on something, talk about it with a respectful tone of voice and use respectful words. Also, no humiliating comparison. Well, you just like your mama and stuff like that. And so, put downs. And well, if you any kind of man, you know, well, you're putting a gasoline on the fire. And so the words that we use should not be words that humiliate. Also, demeaning words, hurtful, embarrassing. And sometimes we can scar one another by words that we use. So make sure those words are not demeaning, that they are not in a way critical of the person, him or herself. It's one thing to talk about an event or an act. It's another thing to talk about a person and make demeaning comments regarding that person. Make sure that the words are truthful. Look at Matthew chapter 12. And every word that we speak is a word that we need to be prepared to answer at the judgment. And I think if we do that, we'll be more careful about what we say. In Matthew 12, 36 and 37, but I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. What I say to my spouse could arise in the judgment. And thus we be careful about the selection of words that I use, every idle word we shall give an account of in the day of judgment. If we say something that is untruthful or belittling, we need to apologize for it because we can give an account. In Ephesians 4 and verse 15, speaking the truth in what? In love. There's a certain way that the truth is to be told. Not to belittle, not to win an argument, but to speak the truth in love. Also, it ought to be thoughtful words. We ought to be wise in the words that we select. We ought to be considerate in the words that we select. In Ephesians 4 and verse 29, the Bible lets us know that when it comes to our words, that our words ought to edify. They ought to build up. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. And so how will these words be received? What effect will they have upon the person? Will they be perceived as being wise words and considerate words? Or would they be piercing and cutting and penetrating and demeaning? Uplifting words that encourage, that inspire. We ought to exhort one another. And so here in a marriage, our words are very, very important. And then, of course, consoling words, comforting words, empathetic words, words that show that how you feel is important to us. And so we want our words to console, to soothe, not to inflame. Number 3, when to talk matters. Not only the tone, not only the words, but when we talk matters. Not before the children. If we're having a discussion about something on which we disagree, that shouldn't take place before the children. Amen. They should not be able to hear conversations about maybe a form of discipline or correction or punishment, because they'll start taking sides. And they'll figure out who's defending me and who's wanting to toe the line. And they're going to try to avoid the person that they know going to call it straight. And next thing you know, they're involved in your discussions. So these conversations should not take place before children. We need to show a united front. That when we talk and come to an agreement, we come before the children together. And they can't run and say, I'm going to go see what Mama said about it. I'm going to see what Dad said about it. And if one of us speak and they run to the other one, that should be a no-no. When we find out we're being used like that, we should stop that game quick and in a hurry. That's right. All right? Not before relatives. When we go to visit on Thanksgiving or Christmas or whenever, that's not the time to talk about my honey, in front of relatives. Because relatives are going to take your side right or wrong in a lot of cases. They ought not do it, but we ought not hold that conversation. In other words, I can't go to my mom's house and we talk about my wife. In fact, she can't talk about my wife, not to me. Now, when I'm gone, she can say what she wants to say. But if I'm there, she can't say a word negative at all. Amen. And that's for sister, brother, or anybody else. That's right. All right. And my wife got to say nothing. That's my job to stop that. Yes. All right. And after one time, you want to see your grandkids again, don't ever bring that conversation up. All right. All right. And so here, not before the relatives. Ron mentioned in his lesson that we are to leave father and mother. Mm-hmm. If you ain't ready to leave yet, you're going to be running back and they interfering, stay with them. Don't marry. All right? And so it's imperative that we leave the family out of those discussions that involve. And if we have a discussion, go together. Amen. Okay? And if you're going to help your son or daughter, help both of them. You're going to give them money, here, this is for y'all. Unless you got some real serious issues going on whereby this person got some type of addiction or something. But just because you my child, and son says, I'm gonna slip this $500 to you, don't tell your husband. Go put it back on the table. If you want me to tell him, I don't want it.
That's right. Amen.
Why? We're one. That's right. Not in public. When you go to the restaurant, you out there in the foyer at church, there ain't time to talk about, or in Bible class either, by the way. Bring up about those times. Well, suppose you married to a man and then he's sitting right there by you. And so, family discussions all take place in private.
Amen.
And so we have to show self-control. If something happens, we should be able to hold ourselves till we get home.
Amen.
And then at the appropriate time, we'll talk about anything. But anywhere ain't the right place. I've seen folk fussing in the grocery store, husband and wife. You know, that's not the place. All right? And so one, it's like growing up. Your parents look at you. That's enough, so okay, something ain't right here.
Amen.
Shut your mouth. And so we need to recognize that the public is not the time to have those kind of discussions. Also not in the morning before work. Everybody getting up, getting ready to go to work. Oh, and by the way, let me throw this at you. And now she leaving mad. Or he leaving mad the whole day.